doing it. So hi everybody, it's nice to see some familiar participants down the side, which is really lovely. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Bates. I am the executive lead of the Support After Suicide Partnership, and we work with the vast majority of organisations in the UK that support people who have been affected by suicide, to the vision that anyone bereaved or affected by suicide is offered timely and appropriate support. We have done a lot of work since our conception in 2013, including working very closely recently with the NHS on implementing their long-term plan. So today I'm not going to go into too much detail about who SASP is because we've done other webinars on that. But what I want to focus on is the long-term plan and what it means for people. So if you see, can everyone see slide 2? Has it just gone over? Yeah, should have done. Great. So what I want to outline today is start off by talking about the NHS long-term plan. What is it? What does it mean? When's it happening? And then move into some of the work we're doing around it to support it. And really importantly, why that will have an impact on what you're doing as funeral directors and as people who support families along what we call the bereavement pathway. And then what's next and how to get involved, basically, and what's going on. I know some of you are already quite involved, and I might use you as examples. Sorry, Lucy, in advance. But if you have any questions at any point, please just put it in the type box and I will try and remember to look at it and answer them as we go along. We will have about 10 minutes at the end for some discussion. So essentially, the NHS long-term plan, as you know, comes out every few years. And this year, for the first time, they mentioned suicide bereavement support. And they made 2 promises. This was in January 2019. The first promise was post-crisis support for families and staff who are bereaved by suicide through the NHS 111 helpline. Now, I think they're still working this out. We are in conversations with Bobby, who's the head of NHS 111, but at the moment it's quite a complicated system because obviously if you go through the current NHS 111 service, it's there for emergency responses. And so you get asked things like, do you have chest pains? Are you breathing? Which is completely inappropriate for suicide bereavement support. So I know that's something they're still looking at, and they're working with some other big organisations to see whether or not that could be something that could be provided. The second point is what we've been involved in, and it is that suicide bereavement support for bereaved families and staff working in mental health crisis services will be available in every area of the country. This is absolutely huge. It's the first time the NHS has had an initiative like this. It's the first time any major public body has taken bereavement to a level where they agree that it is important as an early intervention, that it is something that at the moment doesn't receive enough support, and really made a concerted effort to do something about it. A bit of background, we were involved with the NHS from late 2018, mid-2018, talking about putting pilot services in certain areas with bereavement support. And this then became part of the long-term plan, the bigger long-term plan in the January. So we then worked very closely with them since the beginning to identify areas across the UK who might already have support, to see where the support already lacking, where things can be better, to come up with a model of good support, and to roll out a strategy for implementing that. Wave 1 of this strategy went out last spring, and some of you may be in areas that received funding. So the pilot areas that received funding for new services were the Durham ICS, so Durham, Darlington, etc., and then North and East Cumbria, and they're all one big ICS up in the North Integrated Care System. Then you've got Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, Buckingham, Oxfordshire and Bedfordshire, which is known as the Bob region, Devon, South West London, North Central London and North West London. And the last one is West Yorkshire and Harrogate. So these areas, all STPs, which for those of you, I'm sure everybody knows, but an STP is just how the NHS divides up the country, received support in spring last year. And we also received funding to set up a central hub. And this was to support areas that were either thinking of becoming service providers, already had new services, or possibly are expanding the services they've got, such as in Devon. So this is, sorry, I should have gone on to this slide earlier, but this is basically what's happening. Oh, look, I even wrote it down for myself. There you go. And the hub of information, resources and support is now live. The website is as on the slide. And I'm going to go through that a little bit more in the next few minutes and explain to you what it is, what we're offering. I would really like your input as people who are businesses along the care pathway, what is it we can provide you on the Central Hub that would be really helpful? So please type your suggestions as I'm going along if something comes to you. We are doing this in phases. So at the moment, we've just completed phase 1, which was to get a website live. And we've started phase 2, which is to work with the areas who've just been given funding and also to work with areas who come to us who might want whatever it is. So we're working at the moment with Norfolk and with Lucy Coote on maybe developing some training for local areas, for other local businesses, GPs, clergy, whoever it is that might need that information. And we're also working with the NHS on a longer term strategy for rolling this out across the country. So, the Central Hub. Oh, apparently I'm behind myself. I'm so sorry. This is what we're doing. This is the Central Hub. So we did a big consultation, was our first thing, and we asked a lot of people what they thought the hub would need to provide and who would it be for. And this was kind of what came out of it. So we decided that the hub exists to provide quality evidence, best practice guidance and professional support for all of those who are involved in planning and delivering suicide, bereavement and liaison services. One thing that SASP is very keen to include is, historically, I think it can be perceived that, well, obviously, say the police are involved and then maybe a counsellor's involved, the inquest service, you might have a coroner, or you will have a coroner if it's a sudden death. And these people are traditionally seen as being very much our target audience. But so many people, businesses, community people, come into contact with someone when they're bereaved by suicide, and they're given very little support and very little training and actually very little capacity to do anything. And it really makes a difference to the journey of both the bereaved person and also the business. Because when I'm sure many of you have had in your careers, when somebody comes to you and it's a really complex situation and they're saying, and this happened and this is all horrendous, and you're the first person I've been able to talk to about it, there is an expectation there of you being able to respond and to help them. And sometimes it's not the right place or the right time, and sometimes you don't have the equipment to do that. So what we want to do with the Central Hub is make sure that we are inclusive of all of those businesses and organisations and areas along the bereavement pathway which may come into contact with somebody bereaved, and give them the tools, equipment, resources, whatever it is you need to support someone. One of the very unique things about a bereavement by suicide is that the family come into contact with so many agencies, and it can be really daunting and it can be really harrowing, and it can make their life even more hell, or it can be a chance for multiple points of contact along a support line, and that's what we're trying to do. So this is our homepage. And on the left-hand side there, you can see that it's very kind of clean and clear. The right-hand side is a mobile optimized version. We've not got the mobile perfect yet, but we're working on it. It's certainly usable on a mobile phone and a tablet. And that, again, we did some analysis from our current website and discovered that 44% of people actually access services on their phone. So really important that's usable. And you can see that we have sort of a compelling case. So some of the stuff I will go into, I'm not going to go over too much here, but we have a compelling case for support. So if you're a commissioner and you need some support, and it goes into the kind of economic reasons as to why people might need to be supported. We just have a little bit about who we are, who SASP is, what the project is. The case studies is a great element, and I will pull this out in a bit more detail, but the case studies is basically areas of best practice. At the moment, there are 3 case studies up there, and there are 3 going to be released in the next couple of months. So the 3 that are up there are the Leeds Suicide Bereavement Service and the journey of a bereaved person across weeks and how they're supported. A day in the life of a rural suicide liaison worker down in Cornwall, and basically what the job requires to be a bereavement liaison person. And the Cambridge and Peterborough service and how they set it up and how they set up networks and links and partnerships. I've just had a question from John that said, would the hub include advice and support for neighbours and friends, giving them advice and support for families bereaved? So it's a really good question. We have a separate website called the supportaftersuicide.org.uk, and that would be more aimed at the public. That's our existing website. We do have, as you can see on our homepage, a resource library, and that does have resources for things like Helpers at Hand and Finding the Words. And Finding the Words especially is great for supporting neighbours and friends giving advice. So yes, to some extent. But what we're doing actually as part of phase 2/3 is we are now updating the current SAS website to link in better with this website. So you'll be able to move between the two much more easily. So the answer is yes and no. Not specifically on the central hub part of the website, but yes, and it will be much better connected to the current SAS website. It's, as I'm sure you have come across with making your own websites, it's sort of where do you start and where's the cat's tail? So we decided to start by putting this stuff up first and then connecting the two, but Finding the Words is definitely on it. And so for those of you who don't know, Finding the Words is a resource that we helped to write with University College London and Meadows Communications, and we publish it. And it's a booklet, it's about 25-30 pages, and it's all about how to support someone who's been affected by suicide. So things like what you might want to say, what maybe to avoid, what reactions people might get, preparing you for that conversation, advising them on what might happen next and things like that. And it's not prescriptive, it's just helpful. We have just ordered another print run of it. So if anybody is low on copies, you can only order up to 20 at a time, just because you won't need more than 20 at one go. But if you need to, just email me and I will just write my email address in here, and you can just order them. Just sarah@supportaftersuicide.org.uk. It's so useful for lots of people. And actually, as part of the phase 2 for this, we are on the SAS website. We're going to do some like 30-second, 1-minute tutorial videos for, someone's just walked through the door, what do you do? Or someone's possibly got this complex need, how can you help? And get people around the country who are professionals in this to record videos, and we'll put them up on the website. So there'll be a resource library of video and very quick, kind of almost bite-sized help. What do I do? So going back to our homepage, we've also, you'll see it on the mobile version, but not the main version, just to show you the different things. This is all completely endorsed and backed up by the NHS. It's funded by the NHS, but we are not an NHS service. And that is really important, because suicide bereavement support really needs to be done in a community, and it needs to be done locally. And the NHS have been so good at recognising that. So although a lot of these services that are popping up are NHS funded, they are autonomous. They are not NHS branded particularly. And it's been really wonderful actually to see that, because there are sometimes some difficulties if your loved one died in NHS care and you feel very let down, for example, you might then be put off going to an NHS service. Or if you have the same commissioning issues that some local CCGs may face, and it causes issues for the longevity of the service, all of these problems have basically been minimised by making them locally run services, which is fantastic. And we're the same, although we're national and funded by the NHS, and we answer back to them. A lot of what we do is off our own back and what you need, as opposed to what's been commissioned. So I'm going to delve into a couple in a little bit more detail. The first is preparing a proposal. And the reason I'm bringing this to you is because we have put together, and you'll find it on the website in these tabs are each a set of minimum standards for what we would expect to see in a funding proposal, possibly to the NHS, possibly to another commissioner or someone wanting to put up a service. And it's all about meeting local need, how the service will look, what it will answer, how many people it will answer, and things like that. But we feel that funeral directors are in such a key position. And if you know me, you'll know I've said this before. You are so often the real true front line of what happens after a bereavement by suicide. Yes, the family see the police. The average time the family spend with the police officer is 13 minutes. And the police then go away. They might see a coroner, but the coroner has such a specific job to do. It's not really their job to offer suicide bereavement support. They often don't see the coroner themselves, but a coroner's officer who can be very helpful, but it's not necessarily within their remit. And often funeral directors are the first person that the family come to where they've got space to just offload or to talk or to have any kind of prolonged contact with. And as a result, you often get the front line of it. And for this reason, we are encouraging anyone that puts in a funding proposal to consider, how do you tie in as a local suicide prevention group or a service with your local funeral directors, be it SAFE members or not? Who is it who really talks to the people bereaved, and how are you supporting them? And this will go into this preparing a proposal. So you may find that suddenly you get people coming to you saying, hey, do you want to come and be involved in our suicide prevention group? When I first set out in this job, in this particular role in this job, I must admit, I thought that's what would happen. And I visited several of you in various different areas, including Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, Norfolk, Birmingham and Solihull. Where else have I been? Liverpool, Manchester. And I've been absolutely bowled over by people, local initiatives coming to us and saying, well, how do we get involved in this? We already do this. How do we get involved in the planning? How do we get involved in writing these proposals? So thank you. And this is how you get involved, essentially. Make sure that when the areas are bidding, that it's on it. We sit on the expert reference group for the NHS, so we are also looking for this within the proposals. And all of the regional leads and the NHS leads and the STP leads are well aware of this as well. It's not going to be a surprise to anyone. And that is a big part of my job, making sure that none of this is a surprise to anyone. I'll go over timelines in a minute. So another part of our website is how to develop a service, and this can be quite useful. This is mainly aimed at people who might be looking at funding or have just received funding, but it's also useful to know in a wider context of what kind of services we are looking to set up. In a nutshell, the service is a proactive one. It uses real-time data, so it's referral data, and it would look something perhaps like, in this example, I'm going to say a 25-year-old boy has been found by his family and the police of good reason to believe it's suicide. They go round to the family and they inform the family that the body's been found and they believe it might be suicide, and the police vary across the country as to how they'll say that, but in this case, we'll go quite straightforward. In the model that we are proposing, we would then get the police to ask the family if they would be willing, or if they find it helpful, to have some support from a suicide bereavement liaison person. This will be one organisation that sits somewhere within your STP. We often find they sit quite well within third sectors. Some of the existing ones one sits within a mental health trust, two sit within mental health trusts actually, two sit within mines groups, local mines, one within crews, one within their own called 6 Degrees, that's Manchester, 6 Degrees organisation. So generally they sit within third sector, but it can be anywhere as long as it works. And assuming the family say yes, and we found from existing data that there's about an 85% uptake rate at the beginning, the police officer will then record and pass on the basic information of the family, of the situation. So it will be like family members, postcode, telephone number, and the very top line of the situation to that liaison worker, who will then make a phone call within 72 hours to the family to offer support. This is usually followed by a visit within the first week or so of the bereavement, and they do what's called an assessment of need, which is where they sit down with the family and they basically say, what can we do to help, be it emotional, practical, what's the situation, how can we best support? That support then goes on until the end of the inquest. What happens after the inquest varies across the country in existing services, and we haven't exactly left it open, but we said the person should continue to be supported as needed. But this does change after the inquest. It's quite a long time often, and the needs change. So it depends very much on the local area and what other services exist. Some people find that facing the future groups between crews and Samaritans very helpful. Some people, like If You Care Share up in Durham, continue to offer support for as long as needed. It just depends. Excuse me. So this is what's being proposed here on this webpage, and you're free to read it. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Because I realise I've just given you a lot of information. Also, excuse the mug, sorry, it's a dishwasher day. Okay, I shall carry on. So I mentioned the Hub of Resources briefly, but this is how the Hub of Resources looks, and we are adding to it all the time. It has stuff that you might find very, very helpful. It's got things like the Inquest Handbook, Guide to Coroner Services, policies. At the moment, we're only putting up national resources. And the reason for this is just that we are often very involved in the national resources that are published, and there's a standardized sort of level of writing within that. But we're not saying in the end we wouldn't put up local resources. If you've got a local resource that you think would be helpful nationally, then please let us know. But it is very much aimed at somebody anywhere in the country could go on this and find it helpful. So what we won't use this bit for is promoting, say, local initiatives and things like that. We do have a channel for that. So if you've got cool things that are going on and you want people to know, then we have a newsletter that we send out. We can put up news on the new website when it comes up at the end of the year. We'll have like an area for kind of local initiatives as well. But at the moment, not on this website. And you can search by keywords and by publishers. So if you want, say, the cruise guidebook, you can do that. We're also, we have a small capacity to develop new resources. We are just in the process at the moment of publishing, it came into the office last week, it was very exciting, guidelines for support groups. So this isn't just around suicide, but all bereavement, with a section for suicide. And it's a guide for anyone who already runs a support group or is looking to set up a support group for bereavement. And it's not prescriptive, it's just a guidance, but it goes through, you know, what you might want to consider, safeguarding, how to run a session, what the content of a session might be, some of the legal requirements, for example, DBS or PVG if you're in Scotland checking, you know, how to run it, why it's not a good idea to run it in your own home sometimes, and things like that. So that will go up in the next week or so. We're just waiting on the digital proofs. And if anybody would like to order a copy, then again, email me and I can send it to you. We're going to be continuing to develop these kinds of things, and we are actually in very early conversations with Terry Tennons, about putting something up for funeral directors. So if you have an idea, let me know. So moving on. Oh, these are the case studies that we've put up. And so the 3 that are going to go up in the next few weeks are the British Transport Police are going to talk to us about responding to trauma, because we feel like often the police operate quite separately. So we want to kind of bring that in and look at what they do in relation to what everyone else does and how that can tie in, because often they get very involved in the beginning and then it drops off, so they don't integrate in the same way. So we're doing one with the British Transport Police. We're doing one on real-time surveillance, which is a word you may have heard bantered about, and it's going to become more and more bandied about. Real-time surveillance, we break into 2 things: real-time data and real-time referral. Real-time data is the mass anonymous collection of suicide in real time across the UK, and it allows us to map what's going on. This happens in some areas. London's about to launch Thrive London, which is going to be huge, and they will then be able, within 24 to 48 hours, tell you what's going on with the suicide completions in London, and this will start to roll out across the country in the next few years. And then we have real-time referral, which is what I've talked to you about with the police passing on information. This is very, very much with the consent of the family. Obviously, there are huge legal implications around all of this, and Thrive London I'm pretty happy to talk to anyone, I think, about all the legal implications they've gone through with things like GDPR and things like that. So we'll be doing one on real-time surveillance, and the third one we will be looking at is call-outs from the ambulance service. Okay. So some of the other things we are doing, which I'd like to highlight, are education days. So we are doing 2 things here with this as part of the Central Hub. This is very much in response to people coming to us and saying, we need more information, we want some education around bereavement, suicide, how to help, what to do, setting up services and things like this. And we identified 2 needs. The first is to develop customizable modular options. So this would look like we would offer almost a series of modules on our website, on the Central Hub website, and almost a shopping basket. And you can put together your own day or half day of training and book it with us, and then talk to us, and we will come and help you deliver it. And we'll either deliver it for you by bringing in people, or if you've got people in the local area who you want to speak, then that's is very much tailor-made. And this would include things like lived experience, understanding bereavement, because we know sometimes it's really, you need to start with a foundation. Sometimes people are more advanced. Training the trainers, we think this is hugely important. We would like to kind of do ourselves out of business in the end with this. Local services, real-time surveillance, the long-term plan, minimum standards and how to evaluate services, which for many of you is very important because of commissioners, evaluation, and a whole community approach, so getting other people involved. I feel like whole community approach is often said as a kind of overall all-encompassing term without any real explanation. So for us, whole community approach means things like really thinking through what would a bereaved person need. So, for example, down in Devon, I know that somebody recently had a case where they had a lady was widowed by her husband took his life, and she was left looking after 3 children under the age of 7. She was a very low income family. I'm just going to move this because somebody's just started drilling. Sorry. She was in a very low income family, and she really struggled to get anything arranged because she had 3 children to look after and very little support. So what the liaison worker did was arrange for a local creche to offer her 30 hours of free childcare, and that allowed her to put her children somewhere where she knew they'd be safe and happy, so that she could go and do some of the just practical stuff that needed doing following the death of her husband. And that was really helpful to her. And she said, the emotional support was amazing, but actually having 30 hours to sort this out was what I really, really needed. You also get a lot of people who, don't have anything to wear to court and don't know what to do, or think that the inquest might be a criminal trial, or who are left with huge debts. And this is what we mean by whole community approach. So that if you're bereaved by suicide or you're impacted by suicide, those doors are opened to you and it's not an issue, so that when you're going through the system, you're not also fighting a system. And I think it's something that people find time and time again. So we'd aim this at commissioners, local initiatives, service people on the bereavement pathway. We're going to start to deliver this from about 2020. We are piloting some of it now, and then we are going to start doing it from probably early spring 2020. And the second thing we're doing is working in collaboration with existing provisions. So I mentioned that we are working with Norfolk. This actually came in 2 paths. So I was contacted by Norfolk PHE, but I was also contacted by our very own Lucy, who is doing quite a lot of really cool stuff down in Norfolk already. And we went in with the idea of delivering some education, and actually realised that what they're doing is great. And what we need to do is kind of collaborate with them and see how we can support that. So that's what we're doing. And I'm speaking at their conference on Saturday with University of East Anglia down in Norwich, and looking at how we can develop training that can then possibly be put out to a wider people of what's been done and how it's been done. So we're doing this in Norfolk. We're also doing it in Birmingham and Solihull, where we are supporting them to set up real-time referral, and that we're working there very much with kind of PHE commissioners and the regional lead, Elaine Woodward, who's fantastic, and people like that, and the police and stuff like that. So basically it's kind of saying, well, we're here to help, and we've got a lot of knowledge, we have an awful lot of network, how can we help you deliver what you need to deliver? So moving on, I mentioned the resources. Here is a picture of both resources. I always do this in presentations. I have like a neat presentation and a line, and then I get really excited and tell you things out of sync. I'm sorry. So this is Finding the Words up here on the left. This is Help is at Hand, which I know many of you are already aware of. And then this is our new guidelines for delivering bereavement support groups. These are all free, by the way. If anyone wants them, please just let me know. So another big part we are doing is building a network. And I wanted to let you know what we're doing in terms of a kind of wider context. We're working quite closely at the moment with the Coroner's Court Support Service to see what we can do to assist them, especially around volunteers supporting people through a suicide. We're also working with coroners. So we are working with coroners regionally. We are at the moment doing some work with Louise Hunt, who is the Birmingham and Solihull coroner, but she's also one of the course directors for the Coroner Society. And we are entering into a programme in 2020-2021 where we'll be training coroners and coroners' officers and putting out promotional materials about how they can support people who have been bereaved. or affected by suicide, and really tackling some of the stigma and issues around coroners. Coroners are in a really difficult position. I know many of you work with them far more closely than I do, where a lot of them feel they are there, they have to produce a report, and they're very hesitant to provide any support that suggests it might be suicide before there's been a verdict of at the inquest. I completely understand this. It does not change the fact that the person goes through a bereavement pathway. Even if at the end of the inquest, the ruling is death by misdemeanor, that family has still gone through the exact or very similar pathway to if at the end it was ruled a suicide. And especially with the change of verdicts and how it's going to work with, beyond a reasonable doubt to balance probabilities, this is going to become even more important for a family. So we need to be able to deal with those and tackle that. And I think it's very easy to kind of say, well, coroners are being difficult, which I've heard many, many times, but actually let's work out why, and let's try and see how we can support them. So that's what we're doing with both the chief coroner and with regional coroners. We're actually trialling at the moment a death pack as well with coroners, where we've put a lot of information about local services and national services, and it's a packet that the coroner can give out, and we're going to see how that goes for 6 months and if it's useful. We're working with IPSO, which is the International Press Standards Office, around reporting on a suicide. This is something that the Samaritans do a lot of already, and we work very closely with Samaritans. We are working around bereavement particularly. So many of you will have known about the suicides in Bristol, for example, where there were 8 suicides in a year in students. And every single time there was a new death, the police reported the pictures of all the previous deaths. And I understand why they did that, but it's really harrowing to the family. And we were actually supporting one of the families through that. And it's really difficult because they open a newspaper and all of a sudden there's a picture of their child yet again in a newspaper when they're already struggling with their complex grief. So we're looking at how we can deal with it. So work with IPSO to deal with this kind of reporting of suicide bereavement in a really positive way that actually helps as opposed to makes things worse. And we're also looking at putting like boilerplate text at the bottom of articles for bereavement, signposting people to support, which will hopefully be really helpful in driving people to the support that is there, because a lot of the time people say there's no support. There is support, they just don't know about it. And finally, we're working with the Tell Us Once service. So many of you will have Tell Us Once in your areas, I'm sure. Tell Us Once is actually a great single point of contact. So we're working with them for referring into proactive bereavement support services and making sure that there's a really joined up thinking there in terms of, right, so you're telling us once, you're going to tell us once, have you then been signposted to this support? Would you like a copy of Helpers at Hand and things like that? Someone's typing, so I'm just going to stop for a sec. Oh no, they are typing. Just give me a minute. Yes, we will. So the question is, will we still be providing education days with SAFE? Yeah, absolutely. This is something we're working with Terry on and really want to do. So yeah, 100% we will. Yeah. And if you have any specific things you'd like to know about or be told about, please let us know and we will build that in. We will also continue to write for SAFE articles and SAFE Insight, the articles in SAFE Insight, and yeah, working with you really closely. So I'm sure that many of you listening to this have already kind of thought through how it might impact local areas and how it might impact you. What we are really keen is that this is a positive movement, and that what it doesn't result in is a lot of extra work for people who aren't immediately in the bereavement pathway but are suddenly having to do stuff. And so we are very aware of the impact it will have on local areas and trying to put that support in like proactively, if that's a thing, pre-actively, to make sure that by the time we get local services in your area, you've already been fully supported, you're all aware of what's going on, and you know, like basically where you can go and what to do. So you will see in the next, well, some of you will see it in the next 12 months. For some people, it might be 18 months to 2 years. You will see new proactive bereavement services, which will start to pop up. And there will hopefully be better signposting and somewhere to signpost to. I know this is something that comes up time and time again, is we really want to help, but there's actually nothing else in our area to signpost to, or it's a local SOBS group that's already full, or it's a cruise counselling group that has loads of waiting list, or whatever it is. Obviously with SAFE, you have safe care, which is fantastic if counselling is what people would like, but sometimes the need is different, or additional to that. There should be better joined up communication for impacted people. So we would like to see that the whole pathway gets easier for people, and that there are local networks and better systems, and that information is passed responsibly in a way that helps both the family but also the people who are coming into contact with the family. We would like to see funeral directors recognised for the job that you do. You are already part of the bereavement pathway, and I think it's been ignored for a long time. And I've covered that already. And more understanding and less stigma. So this will naturally raise awareness of what's going on. I've already seen a huge increase in local campaigns and awareness in the last 12 months. I've been in this job 4 years, and I have seen so much activity in the last 12 months. It really blows you away, actually. And I think we will move to less stigma. We've heard fewer and fewer stories, and I don't think it's because people have stopped telling us. In the beginning, I dealt with people who said, can my son be buried in a church? Because my vicar says he can't because it's suicide. Yes, of course they can. My doctor isn't comfortable with his potential involvement in this because my daughter went to see him 2 weeks before the death, and he's worried that he's going to be in trouble. And these are all completely understandable things, but they make it so difficult for a family. So I'm really hoping that through this we will see more understanding and better pathways. So moving on, what next? So I've mentioned the 10 pilot areas. They will expand the current provision. And we are actually, in just over an hour, I'm going into a meeting with the NHS to do the next round of strategy for the NHS long-term plan. So the general timeline for that is that we will decide the next we don't decide, the NHS decide, but we will talk about the strategy going forward for the long-term plan and how the next areas are going to be selected. The NHS will then go away and do this and shortlist. They will then be invited sometime in the new year to put in proposals, and they will then find out the outcome of those proposals, probably early summer-ish 2020. And then the next thing will start again in the autumn till everyone's got funding. And we will also move into Central Hub Phase 2, which, as I've said, is more case studies, the education days. Rather excitingly, I'm finally going to get another full-time member of staff. Because for those of you who know me, we started off very, very small. It was an initiative started by Hamish Ovage, who is the chair of the Support After Suicide Partnership, and I was their first full-time employee. I'm now delighted to say that there are 3 of us, but I'm still the only full-time employee. And so we will be recruiting somebody to support this full-time, which will be fantastic. And finally, we will be looking at how people can evaluate. As I've said throughout, we are not a prescriptive organisation, we never will be. But what we do want to do is provide helpful guides for people who might have to do evaluation and looking at how minimum standards can be met and best practice. So, how can you get involved? I think one of the really cool things that could be done is I've already seen funeral directors become part of suicide prevention groups and have a real interest in this and say, look, this is something we come across a lot in our professional career and we would like to be involved. I would fully recommend that if you can. Linking in with local services. So again, thinking about what else do those people have to the people that come to you, what do they deal with, and how can you help as a funeral director in a way that says, well, actually, I don't know, there's something down the road that might be able to help, or just help, just kind of do the school know if they've got children under a certain age, like is this something the school's aware of? Do you know that the Samaritans have a step-by-step program that can come in and talk to other people at school and to pupils at the school, and that kind of joined up thinking. Telling us what would be helpful. We are very fortunate in that we are an organisation that is led by its members. And while we have these initiatives and we think we have a model of what we know works, if you've got a really great idea, then we absolutely will take that on board. So please let us know. The Central Hub has been built purely on the evidence of what's helpful. Leading local initiatives, which, as I've mentioned, happens quite a lot. And please continue to do that. And just talking to each other and saying, we have this issue, what happens? I think suicide is something that isn't talked about enough, and it's difficult. both to work with a family, but it's also difficult on the other people in your business. And the more you talk about it, the more support you can have. So I have actually finished this slightly early, but if anybody has any questions or would like a discussion, please type away. Is there anything anybody would like to kind of ask me about or add? No typing at all. Nope. Okay, John's typing something, but as he's typing, I'm going to ask you a question, and please respond if you can. If you were to access a page of information, and it could be video or other media content, what would you find most helpful to be on there? So you've got 5 minutes in a back room. What would be most helpful? So while you're thinking about that, just to recap, all the downloadable pamphlets are in a published form, also that can be requested by email. Yeah, so all the So in our resource hub, all of the pamphlets that are produced by SASP, so these 3, you can request by email. Yep, that's fine. If it's something in this hub that's not produced by SASP, I can try and get it for you. For a lot of them, they are only digitally available, but give me an email and I'll see what I can do. And I should have said you can download all of these, and they're all free license as far as we know. So you can use them to influence what you're doing, or set up education around them or anything like that. That's absolutely fine. They are usually quite helpful. So these ones, you can also use any of the artwork or anything like that from them. They're all open. Just going to pause to wait for somebody typing. Sorry, what would you like me to say again? Sorry. So my question to you is, if you had, I don't know, 5 minutes and you wanted to know more about something, and there was like an area on a website that you could access, what would be most helpful? What would you want to know about? Would you want it to be text, video content, a resource, and what would you want it to tell you, was my question. How do you find out if there's suicide? Yeah, that's a very good question. How do you find out if there's a suicide prevention hub close to us? Excellent question. And actually something we should consider for the website. It's a very good point. So at the moment, email me and I will let you know, or just write it there and I will let you know. Or in the future, it's a really good idea to look at what support might be available. So on the SASP website, supportaftersuicide.org.uk, we have a map that points to local support, but that isn't necessarily STP-led support. It's just any local support group. So it's aimed very much at the impacted person. So what we could potentially do is have information on areas that provide support and contacts for them. And that's something we can definitely develop if that would be helpful. I've just put up the slide that says who just got funding as well, because that might be helpful. So these are the areas that were in the first round. Yeah, so in Brentwood in Essex. So Essex, unfortunately, is one that faces some of the biggest difficulties with support. There is a subgroup, you're right. At the moment, Essex doesn't have a huge amount of support, I'm afraid. I think it's always helpful to join up with local areas. And I'd be very happy to speak to you afterwards and look at what we could try and do personally to get sort of PHE and NHS involved. I think that would probably be the way forward, because I'd say Essex is somewhere where they need to increase the capacity of support. So I think in terms of what you can do, start that conversation. We can help in that, hopefully, and get more support, because I know Essex is one of the areas where, unless you live at either end of the county, there's very, very little. Sorry. Yeah, so Kent and Medway, yes, there are. Kent and Medway have a system where you can call and get support, although it's not actually based in Kent and Medway. I can find out the details of that for you. For Julia and Lucien, can you just drop me emails with the question in it so that I can respond to you separately? But there is in Kent, and Kent and Medway are doing a lot of preliminary work at the moment to try and make better support services. So I think you'll see a real difference in the next 6 months to a year. There is a service that exists, and I would have to look it up for you, but I can certainly let you know. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Or anything they want me to go back over or in more detail? There is not a hub in Wiltshire at the moment, but there is a very strong one in Oxfordshire. So I would suggest that we can help you talk to Oxfordshire and see if there's anything you can do, because it's on the border. This is an interesting thing that's going to come up with the NHS plan, and it's slightly unavoidable. We are looking at when an area gets funding, and we are looking at where that area is, like geographically in relation to other areas with funding. But you end up at the moment with this slightly odd situation where you, for example, North East Essex and Suffolk are the perfect example. So Suffolk has a service, North East Essex doesn't. So if you sit on the border, it's really difficult, because you might see people who live 5-10 miles away getting support that isn't available in your area. The services themselves are usually really good at bringing people in a bit and saying, yeah, okay, that's fine, they can come to us. But they can't always do it, because sometimes they're at capacity. It's something that in the end, I think will solve itself, because in the end, all STPs should have services, and then we enter into the standardization of services. So it's a slightly different question. But yeah, for the next couple of years, I'm afraid this is going to be a bit of an issue, and we are trying to kind of sort it out by having areas that are being funded. But most of the funding is, well, we don't have a strategy yet. So that's the point of my next meeting. But the funding will mainly be allocated based on readiness as opposed to geography, because it's really the only way to do this to make sure it's successful. Okay, some more questions. Hi, Susan. Yes, you can certainly get a copy of all of this, and it's being recorded, so that should be fine. In answer to the question, I think the video style bite-sized subjects for someone going in to see a family of suicide makes you feel you can make a difference. Yeah, that'd be really nice. Okay, so we could do something that's like maybe, I don't know, a minute long, that just gives you a quick rundown of what might be helpful, what might not. So it's something you could watch quite quickly, but would still give you lots of information. And then we could possibly have like longer text versions available for when people have time. North Yorkshire, speak to me separately, Kevin, and be more specific, because some areas yes and some areas no, because North Yorkshire isn't one STP. It's put across. So there are in some areas, because the Durham ICS covers some of North Yorkshire. Support group in Bedfordshire is part of the new, so that's part of a new service that's being set up. Try Milton Keynes in Bedford. Again, I can, if you get in touch with me, I can let you know. I will just put my email address back up on the screen if anyone wants to email. So Bedford is Bedford's in the Bob region, the Bedfordshire, Oxfordshire, and Berkshire, but they also have things in Milton Keynes and Bedford. So it's worth looking at both of those initiatives. And again, I know that Milton Keynes is somewhere where they've got quite a good local initiative. So I can get you the details of that if you email me. Where we deliver bereavement support training in Norfolk and Suffolk, it would be helpful to offer the booklets to the schools and have videos to add into PowerPoint. Yeah, I completely agree, and that's something that we can certainly provide and work with. We can also do things like overall videos that introduce stuff. Sorry, that wasn't very good English, but sort of an overall video that's talks about the importance of it and why it needs to happen and things like that. If that's helpful, yeah. Yeah, I mean that's definitely something we can do and pull people in, and I think so. If the areas SASP are able to help, as I said, our knowledge networks, knowing what's going on across the country, and sort of preparing local areas for the fact that this is going to happen. And what we don't want is to have a service that's not, so somebody applies for funding and it's kind of dropped in with no real understanding of the context of the local area. We want them to grow from the local area. And that's happening very naturally already. It's great to see, but just to make sure that that happens. Hi, Deborah. Brilliant. So Deborah says, I represent SAFE and local funeral directors at Haringey Suicide Prevention Group and have been invited on the working party for the new bereavement support group, which is fantastic. Sorry, bereavement support service. Hopefully our meeting is tomorrow. That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear, because Haringey have been one of the people who've really pushed forward. So North Central London have just been included in the first 10 round. And David Moss has been leading that, who leads Mind in Haringey. And they have done some fantastic work to make sure that people across 5 boroughs in London are supported. So it's really good to see. And please let me know what happens. What was I going to say about North Central London? Yeah. So one of the other things that we are very aware of is that a service in, say, North Central London is going to be hugely different to a service in North Yorkshire. One of them is going to have a huge population influx problem. The other one is going to have a huge geography driving across the landscape problem. We have examples of both. So if people find it helpful, it's on the website, it's on the Central Hub website, and we are trying to make sure that we have a general representation of what it might look like. It's one of the reasons that the first case study we put up was the rural one in Cornwall, because a lot of people have said to us, well, that's all very well to have a service, but actually the reality is our STP covers 100 square miles. How on earth are we supposed to drive that on a daily basis? And I hope that answers some of the questions. And then we have others such as Southwest London, which are hugely densely populated, and they cover only 4 boroughs of London, but 2 million people in that space. So geography is not a problem. People basically come to them, but then you've got the element of, well, we've got a huge number of people in one very small space. So it's really interesting to see how it's different and these challenges arise. And Lucy's just said that I have some families with lived experience who would be happy to do a video, which would be fantastic. And actually that highlights a really important point, which this all starts and finishes with people with lived experience. Many of the SASP team have lived experience, and that's where a lot of their stuff comes from. And we are constantly working with people who have been impacted directly by suicide to say, is this helpful and is this not? And that's something I would also encourage in local areas to say, what worked well and what didn't. I know that many of you took part in some research that the University of Manchester did and we supported. And I just wanted to mention that very quickly and say that the first presentation of results will be given at a conference in Manchester on the 25th of September. And those results, I believe, will then be made available publicly in a report that is coming after that. I'm not entirely sure when the report's released. It's being headed up by Dr. Sharon MacDonald, who does some fantastic work at the University of Manchester and runs Suicide Bereavement UK. So for those of you who did take part and want to know what the update is, there it is. Very soon you will see some results. If there are no more questions, I think I shall bring this session to a close. If anybody else would like to say anything, say it now. Apologies for the slight mismatch of speaking to slides. Thank you. Great. And please email me with anything that's been involved in this, or if you'd like resources or information, especially if you ask for specific information in your areas. I'm so happy to provide that. So just let me know. I will be around. Oh, and Lucy's just said, if anybody would like to attend the UAE conference on Saturday, it's this Saturday, the 14th, please email her. How much is it a head, Lucy? I've forgotten. So the conference on Saturday is £25 and it's held in near Norwich. In Norwich? Near Norwich.